our dive into the scriptures and getting to know the scriptures. I don't have a sheet, so that tells me nothing got written down, and that's a good thing, because I actually wanted to move us to a little bit of this week's focus, and this week's focus was on the reality of false teaching. And I'd like to take you, because unfortunately, it's not a popular subject. And it's almost become impossible to have the conversation in the climate we have today, because everything is so and polarizing. And so you can't even bring up something that could be a good conversation, because immediately people are starting to take sides. So let's all take sides. It's everyone here except for everyone here against Alan. So Alan, notice you guys don't even, you don't even sit with, see, you don't sit with them, because we might as well, we're all on one side, Alan's on the other. And we probably don't have a chance. He's gonna whoop us anyways. But I share that with you because I go into this, we have about 10 minutes. I want you to understand that it's okay to talk about false teaching. We can go into the conversation with understanding that I would call it, this is Jeff Dorth, I would call it, there are levels of false teaching. So I'm going to give you some terms. Orthodox, say it with me, orthodox. Orthodox is actually, if you will, kind of thinking right teaching. Heterodox, let's say that, heterodox. Heterodox is not right teaching. Not right teaching. Heretical, say it, heretical. Orthodox, heterodox, heretical. This is Jeff Dorth. I try to look at things through that lens. So, for instance, and I think I shared this story. If I didn't, I hope I didn't, because now is the place it belongs. I was in Lodi. I was a young pastor. The church was growing. It was exciting times. I was an associate pastor like Kevin is. And I had all these people coming to me and saying, the Lutheran pastor over at such and such church is telling people that there's nothing in the Bible that's against abortion, and abortion's okay. I'm like, you are clearly not hearing him. And they said, no, Pastor, and I'm getting it from multiple people. So I knew him. Actually, I was in my 20s. He was probably in his, sadly, 50s. I'm in my 60s. I don't know how that happened. But he was very well respected, bright man, actually became president of the Synod, of the California Synod. I went over and I set up an appointment with him and I said, hey, help me out here. Our people are clearly not hearing you correctly. And da-da-da-da-da-da. And he said, these were his next words. Oh yeah, they're hearing me absolutely correctly. I said, excuse me? He said, absolutely, Jeff. Now, I'm a young guy. He's probably old enough to be my dad. And he's like, but what about? And I start in Jeremiah. I start in Psalm 139. I start in with John chapter, in Luke chapter 1 with John the Baptist moving in the womb and all this. And he says, are you ready? He goes, oh, Jeff, you are so naive. Those are all examples of poetry. I said, poetry? Come on, John. That is just baloney. I mean, you can't say poetry out of the prophets, out of Psalms, maybe, out of the gospel. Give me a break. We sat there and debated. We had a healthy going out into the water that's up to our waist and started spending time in the scriptures. Did I change his opinion? Did he change mine? No. Would I call him Orthodox? Not a chance. Would I call him heterodox? Probably. Would I call him a heretic? Possibly. But probably not. Then I had my friend Russell. Russ and I, we called him Flash Gordon. I played softball against him, very gifted athlete who was a pastor. And he loved to show his giftedness against me. And we had lots of fun together. I'm in my 20s. And he and I are drinking a beer, and we start talking about his Lutheran church. And he looked me square in the face after a few beers and said, Jeff, you have to understand, here's where I am at. Now, there was, back in those days, how many of you remember the days of the ALC and the LCA? He was LCA. And just for the record, LCA was different than ALC. He was LCA, and he said to me, he goes, Jeff, you know, I just got to tell you, man, we were just such good friends, but this baloney about Jesus being the only way to heaven is just baloney. And Oh, well, we were drinking. So I said, you're a Unitarian. I laid back, you're a Unitarian. He says, no, I'm a Lutheran Unitarian. Let's go back. What's the first term? Orthodox, heterodox, heretic. So he became my heretic friend. You say, why would you call him a heretic? Well, I'll be up front with you. I believe the scriptures teach that life begins at conception. I believe that there is no way you can intellectually look at the scriptures and understand it in a different way. But I'll leave that one up to the Lord. Ultimately in heaven, we all sin, and I sin. According to God, I've killed so many people. I'm a murderer, according to the Lord's word. And so are you, by the way. We are all murderers. But if someone holds to that position that John held to, pastor, I don't see that. It's just not, I don't get it, but I accept it. He still held to Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, right? Oh my goodness, girl, absolutely. He became the president. I don't think all of us understand where the evangelical Lutheran Church in America has moved to. And you got a good idea, Alan. And just to make that simple, the evangelical Lutheran Church got a very big, wide breadth. Hold on, let me finish. They have a wide breadth. So you have folks like my buddy Russ, who's still probably a pastor, who's basically a Unitarian. Then you have John. And then you have a couple of the other guys that I knew, that names escape me right now, who were ELCA, who were just as, they might as well have been Missouri Synod guys. So they have just, their concept of what it means to walk together is way wide. I always laugh because we fight over stupid things. They do not. They fight over big things. Now, I'm going to come back to you about how we look at this. I'm telling you, I could take you to passages, Romans 16:17 says, avoid false teachers. Paul says it straight out. 1 Timothy chapter 4, Paul says, avoid false teachers. But it's not just Paul. 1 John, the Apostle John says, 1 John chapter 4, avoid false teachers. Peter says in 2 Peter 2, avoid false teachers. This is not just like and this is 2,000 years ago. So how does this translate? Well, it's kind of a challenge because I would suggest to you that false teachers, I may be one. I hope not. I'm trying. But as my brother lovingly reminded me this morning, you know, you're teaching the scriptures the best you can from what you know about them, but what if you're wrong? And so all of us have to recognize at some level we are accountable to the Lord, and we better be careful before we start yelling out, heretic, false teacher, you're wrong, and the like, because all of us have to struggle ultimately with the scriptures. Kevin.
The Pope recently just came out and said that all people are good.
Huh? I heard the interview too. I thought it was a great interview, and I said to Mary, I loved everything he said except that. It torqued me off to no end. I heard the interview. It was a great interview. I thought he had some really important, powerful things. I really, in some ways, appreciate this Pope. But that, I was thinking to myself, dude, you're actually in complete, but it's one comment. He may have had indigestion. I don't know. Let's give him a little break. But basically, he was speaking against his own teaching of his church body, because Roman Catholicism teaches original sin. So maybe that's why it's hard. Yeah, that's a good question. It was translated. Yeah, I don't know. We're not going to debate it. All I'm telling you is, what I want you to know is that this is a delicate conversation. And what I would suggest to you, let's own the fact that there have been false teachers from all the way back in the Old Testament times. There's still false teachers today. And by the way, let's own, ultimately, we're all broken, and we may have taught falsely from time to time. And taking that humble perspective realizes that God is a God of grace. He covers over our stupidity. Yes.
Seems to me that the breaking point for the place where you become a false teacher is when you deny that Christ was born and died and rose again.
So now you're starting to get to the distinction, Sharon. It's a great observation. When do you move from heterodox to heretic? Well, by the way, I mean, that's a big conversation. John Huss was burned at the stake as a heretic, but Luther said he was a scholar and a wise teacher of the scriptures. So people throw around the word heretic. For Sharon, she's like me, when you start misrepresenting the person of Christ, then you are no longer, that's heresy. We have to wrestle through this. The funny thing is, and your study this week talked about some of the pitfalls, and I'm going to do them just real quickly. One of the pitfalls, allegory. Allegory is a way of looking at the scriptures. The scriptures have allegory in them. The problem is when you say things are in the Bible, you have to find the hidden meaning of it, that you can't take it at face value. Do you know that if you do allegory that way, you'll not take seriously anything in the Bible that you can't reason with? And there have been very, very bright people. One of the greatest scholars was Origen. He was an amazing church father, but he was an allegorist. He took everything to, he did not believe in the physical resurrection. And he did not believe that Jesus rose from the dead physically, but it was an allegory. Do you know that there is a certain, again, I want to be careful, but I checked it, confirmed it yesterday. He has not denied it. There's a certain politician, one state over, who happens to be a clergyman, who actually went on record as saying that, that the resurrection's meaning is not a physical resurrection, but it is that we people should be taking care of one another. And I heard him say it in his thumping, and he won the election, by the way, if you're starting to figure out who this is. And if you don't know who it is, you can talk to me later. But this pastor became politician, used allegory to take the resurrection. My brother went to Valparaiso, and he was exposed to this straight up, and he was an engineering student, and he went crazy calling me and saying, what is going on here? I don't understand this. So allegory can be very dangerous when it says there's a hidden meaning in everything in the Bible. Second of all, another dangerous is rationalism. The teaching of rationalism is basically to say if it cannot be rationalistically understood, reasonable, it's not true. It has to be and by the way, thus we have, I know, I'm not trying to open up a can of worms with you, but I'm sure there are people in here that hold to macroevolution. I do not. I hold to microevolution. What's the difference? Well, microevolution is the change of continue evolving within species. That's microevolution. Can't argue it. It's definitive. Macroevolution is a theory. It has not been proven. I don't care what somebody tells you. Macroevolution is moving from one species to another. There is no absolute scientific evidence of it. There's all kinds of little dots that you could say, but here's a perfect example. People will say, you cannot take the Bible as being truth because it isn't reasonable about creation. And I would say, baloney. Were you there? And you haven't given us anything that's definitive evidence that shows that your understanding is scientifically proven. Rationalism, that's a big one. I'll take one that's not so, that I think is real big, but how could Jesus say, take, eat my body, my blood? It's not reasonable. It must be symbolic. So you can start to see how some of these things work out. So we said allegory, rationalism. We'll save the last two for next week. Let's close in the family prayer. Lord, remember us in your kingdom and teach us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, well, hey, have a wonderful day. Enjoy the time the Lord's given you, and the beautiful weather. Oh, lovely, lovely. And we'll see you this week.